Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, if you're just joining us, let us know where you're joining us from. And as I said, my name is Janet Grant, and I'm the Vice Chair of Fair Districts. I'm going to cover just a few housekeeping items, and then we're going to get right into the program. So we are recording this program, as you can see, so that we can share it with others that weren't able to join us tonight. If you do go to our website, you will see that we have been recording all of these kinds of programs so that you can catch up on those if you haven't been able to join us. And we also make the slides available. So after the program tonight, you'll be able to access these slides. We would like you to ask questions along the way. We are going to be providing a lot of information tonight. And so we've got a few folks that are going to be kind of monitoring that and trying to answer some questions right in the chat. And then at the end, we are trying to leave plenty of time for Q&A so that we can be sure to answer all of your questions tonight. So continue to put your questions in the chat and we'll get to those as we go. And as you can see, if you got the setting turned on right on your Zoom, we are trying tonight for the first time having live transcript captioning. So you will be able to follow along with that. And we want to have that available also from an accessibility standpoint. So let us know what you think about having that showing. So with that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Ken Lawler, who many of you know as our chair of Fair Districts, and he's going to tell us what to expect tonight. Ken?
Thank you, Janet, and I'll add my welcome to everybody who is spending this beautiful evening and maybe part of their dinner hour or maybe a cocktail with Fair Districts Georgia. We really appreciate everybody's support. We had a town hall back in March, and some of the feedback that we got from the town hall was a lot of good information. We'd like the program to be a little bit shorter. We're going to keep it to an hour tonight. Some of the things you wanted to see in future town halls were a little bit more. Tell us more about the process. How does gerrymandering arise, and show some examples of gerrymandered districts, right? And more facts. Show us the need for change. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to cover in our program tonight. So I'm going to start just by giving a quick recap of who we are on the next slide, which is, we're a nonpartisan organization. And those of you who know that's true about us, we are equal opportunity critics of Democrats and Republicans who gerrymander. We don't like anybody doing it. We are working to end electoral map rigging, of course. Our focus is to fight any kind of gerrymandering, whether it's partisan preferences or minority, issues with minority representation. We're really working on both of those aspects. Our focus is really on the congressional districts and the state house and the state senate. We typically do not get involved at the county and municipal level in terms of those districts. However, we do want community involvement with respect to the state house, state senate, and congressional districts, and we will be addressing that a little later in the program. Our ultimate goal is to reform Georgia's process, to make it so that we work ourselves out of a job and districts are drawn fairly. That's not going to happen this year, but we're trying to get fair maps done this year. Our perspective on this is that, in the last couple election cycles, we've pretty well established that Georgia is a swing state. And our legislative and congressional districts need to reflect that new reality. That doesn't mean that everything's 50-50, but it means things should be in balance. And so that's the work that we're doing this year. On the next slide, let me just give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover tonight, right? So Redistricting 101, explain how redistricting is done. For some of you, this may be a recap. For others, it might be your first exposure to the process. How is redistricting accomplished? And then, what to expect during this redistricting year. It's going to be a different year because of the delays in the census data. But what might we expect in terms of the way maps get drawn this year? We'll talk then about gerrymandering. I look at it and say redistricting is one thing. Gerrymandering is basically cheating while you're redistricting. We don't like it. We'll talk about how that arises and how it's done, what some of the tricks are used, and then we'll talk about how we're going to fight that. And then lastly, we'll close with what can you do? How can you help Fair Districts Georgia, advocate for fairer maps this year? So I'm going to turn the program now over to Karen Davenport, who chairs our education committee, who's going to take you through the first segment of the program. Karen Davenport, take it away.
Thank you, Ken. So let's start with the first question, question 1. What is redistricting and how does it affect our elections? First of all, let's look at the census. The Constitution, next slide.
Right.
The Constitution, Article 1, Section 2 mandates that our country conduct a count of its population every 10 years. The 2020 census marked the 24th time that the country has counted its population. The first time was in 1790. Now, each home received an invitation to respond to a short questionnaire online, by phone, or by mail. This is the first time that everyone could respond to the census online. The census provides critical data that lawmakers, business owners, teachers, and many others use to provide daily services, products, and support for individuals and their communities. Next slide. So let's think about what is redistricting. Well, after every census, lines are redrawn to maintain the same number of people in each district so that there's one person, one vote. In our federal government, there are 435 House representatives, and for the state of Georgia, there are 14 representatives in the Congress. The Georgia House District has 180 House districts across Georgia, and there are 56 Senate districts from across Georgia. The current majority political power, which are Republicans right now, is responsible for drawing the lines. Currently, each US House district includes 711,000 people. This year, as the Georgia state legislature is redrawing districts, what they draw will last for 10 years. This redrawing is integral to our democracy. People move, cities can gain or lose residents, new communities are constantly forming. So, it's really, really important that these district borders reflect these shifts. And this is important to consider as we outline to have fair districts and equal democratic representation. Even though Georgia's population has increased 10% since 2010, we don't anticipate at this time that Georgia will gain or lose any House district seats. Next slide. So if you look at this slide illustrates a hypothetical map of fair districts in Georgia. Notice how the districts are contiguous. That means each district must share a common touching border. Notice how the districts are as compact as possible, closely and neatly packed together, densely together. Now, keeping precincts intact, keeping counties together if possible, following natural boundaries. Following these parameters help districts to be connected so that legislators can actually represent a group of citizens that are geographically connected. All of these help our legislators actually represent its citizens. Unfortunately, the Georgia Constitution is very vague about voting rights and the characteristics of electoral districts. Our current redistricting process gives lawmakers broad leeway in drawing district lines. And the way our districts are currently drawn, it doesn't make it easy for legislators to serve the needs of the citizens or citizen groups. Now let's look at the redistricting timeline for 2021. Let's understand this timeline for this year. As you can clearly see, our legislative session has ended. We're expecting April 30th that the state population data will be released. And then in the spring and summer, there will be some hearings throughout the state, and we really want you to key that in with your calendar because it's important that we are involved. The key dates we want you to look at here with the arrows, you see September 30th, we're actually expecting all the census data, and late 2021, the map release will probably take place. So you see those arrows there are the key important dates that we really want you to key into. In late in 2021 or early 22, there's going to be some special legislative sessions to vote on redistricting plans. We expect that things could rapidly move after September 30th once the census data is available. Okay. Now, let's think about the next question. What could possibly happen with redistricting in Georgia in 2021? Well, there's going to be some impacts for redistricting. First of all, next slide. Georgia's population growth is like 10%. As I said earlier, there's population shifts throughout the state. There's going to be shifts from rural areas to metro areas. There's a growing minority population. That means there are more people of color. And just as a reminder, as I say, race is just something that is not, it's just melanin, but there's expected to be more people of color in the state in the next decade, and significant district changes are going to be required to account for these populations. Okay, next slide. If you look at this map, if you start looking at this map, you look at the top left map, that's our current congressional districts, and we have 6 Democratic districts roughly and 8 Republican districts. If you look at the center map, if our districts are gerrymandered to favor Republican, the legislators draw them that way, then we'll have 3 Democratic districts and 11 Republican districts. If you look at the map on the top right, if the districts are gerrymandered to favor Democrats, then we'll have 8 Democratic districts and 6 Republican districts. Now, if you look at the bottom left map, you will see that this map would be one that would be drawn probably a little bit by someone that would not be Democrat or Republican. And then if you look at the center map, again, you would see how these districts are designed. And then on the one on the far bottom right, we have another map and how it's outlined here. This map on the bottom, I'm sorry, it would be compact following the county borders. And then the one in the center would be maximizing majority minority districts. And then the one on this left one will be promoting more competitive elections. So as we go through, I want you to think about which of these redistricting maps would be fair. Fair District's view is that ideal districts need to share common touching borders, be closely and neatly packed together, be competitive, and be connected so legislators can actually represent a group of citizens that are geographically connected. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Lou McCloskey, who's going to talk about what is gerrymandering and why is it a problem.
Thank you so much, Karen, for those really clear explanations. So, what is gerrymandering? Why it is a problem? The gerrymandering is the manipulation of boundaries so that whoever is drawing the lines draws it to the advantage of their group. That's what gerrymandering is, and it has a long history. In fact, it goes back till right after we became a country, when a man named Elbridge Gerry, his son said to him, you know, you could really draw these districts another way, and you could probably make sure that Patrick Henry doesn't win this seat that you do. So that's what he did. And in fact, Patrick Henry did not win the seat, but Elbridge Gerry drew some really bizarre districts that looked just like a salamander. And that's why gerrymandering became named after him. It just goes to show that if you do something insidious, that you will not be remembered for being a vice president, which Elbridge Gerry was, or a signer of the Declaration of Independence, which Elbridge Gerry was, but no, you'll be remembered for gerrymandering. There are different kinds of gerrymandering. As you can see, gerrymandering can end up with these crazy configurations of what districts look like. But the strange thing about it is that districts can look okay and still be gerrymandered so that it's to the advantage of the people who want to have the advantage. One way to gerrymander is racially. And we have census data that says which race people are, even though, as Karen says, it's just sort of an imaginary concept. We have those data, and people can gerrymander and say, well, let's put all the people of one color in one district and pack them all in, and then we can have more districts that are not of that color. We also have partisan gerrymandering. Racial gerrymandering is made illegal by the Voting Rights Act, but partisan gerrymandering is still legal. And as you know, in 2019, the Supreme Court decided that it wasn't in their jurisdiction to decide about political gerrymandering. They were leaving it up to the states. So it's still legal. And basically that favors one political party over another. So you gather all the data about who votes which way, and then use that to decide how you're going to gerrymander. There's another really insidious form of gerrymandering that's called prison gerrymandering. And what happens with prison gerrymandering is that people who are incarcerated are counted at the place where they're incarcerated. So people who generally come from urban areas, generally, maybe a majority of them are often people of color, are counted in rural areas that are mostly white and give them extra votes. There are 5 districts in Georgia in which prisoners who can't vote and don't live there, except when they're incarcerated, count for 5% of the vote. And if you'll see in the future, with other slides, we're going to see how close the votes are sometimes. So it's really scary to have this kind of representation. So there's lots of ways to do it. Let's take let's do this little exercise, though, to look at how gerrymandering works exactly. We're going to take our imaginary district, and this district has 2 political parties. They're called the dimes and the pennies. And as it happens in this district, there are exactly 50 dimes and 50 pennies. But since citizens of these districts don't live in neat little rows, let's mix them up, okay? We're all going to be mixed up, and that's our hypothetical state. All right. Now, let's let the dimes draw the districts. Okay, what are the dimes going to do? The first thing the dimes do is one of the strategies of gerrymandering, which is called packing. So the first thing the dimes do is they try to find districts where they can squeeze as many pennies in as possible. Here's 2 districts with all pennies. All pennies, and that means that these pennies, yes, they give up 2 districts to pennies, but they can split the rest of the pennies up among other districts, so that even though they have 50% of the population, they can end up with a lot more representatives and a lot more vote. They crack the rest of the pennies and put them in districts where the dimes are always in the majority. And as you can see, the result of this is that although the district is 50-50, the dimes win 8 districts and the pennies win only 2. But it goes both ways, right? We know gerrymandering happens with both parties. And what if the pennies draw the district? Look what happens. The pennies draw the map, and the same thing happens in the opposite direction. The pennies win 8 districts, and the dimes, who are packed into these 2 little districts, only win 2. That's what happens when the pennies draw the map. What if you just do it randomly? Here, these are sort of some nice, rather compact, contiguous districts. And look what happens. The dimes win 3, the pennies win 4. There are 3 ties, 3 competitive districts. So even a random assortment can make up districts that are a lot fairer than any other way. This is a little story about mid-cycle gerrymandering in Georgia. In Georgia, unlike most states, legislators can change the districts at every session to make their seats safer. They can do little tweaks to make it easier for an incumbent to keep their district and stay in office without expending a lot of money and time and whatever to get reelected. So in Republicans in this situation adjusted House District 111 to protect an incumbent. In 2014, this Republican incumbent won by 11,024 votes, 53%. But that didn't feel very safe. So they try, that since 2000, the state has been changing and there have become more Democrats. So they decided to do a mid-cycle adjustment in 2015. And as a result, by 2016, what they did with the mid-cycle adjustment is they added these green areas to District 111, and they subtracted the pink areas. So this little adjustment just to find out, make sure you get reelected in this area. And what happened is the incumbent did win by 946 votes, 52%. So even though this area is changing and the population is changing, they managed to squeak out a victory. In 2018, then the Republicans still won by 742 votes. But by the November election, after the special election, a Democrat won. Things started to change, were changing in this area. Another way of looking at gerrymandering and looking at the power it has is to compare the statewide vote share. And the statewide vote share is determined by averaging these statewide votes for the president, the governor, and the US Senate races. Those are all statewide votes. So we average how many people voted that way in those races, and that's the statewide vote. So in 2000, with the existing maps, the Democrats had 50.7% of the votes. The pendulum was swinging toward the Republicans. But because they drew the lines, they had 59% of the districts. In 2002, they ended up losing the majority, and the Democrats only had 46.1% of the statewide vote. But since they had this many districts, they were able to control the redistricting process, and they still maintained to have 59% of the districts. However, the court interfered because of racial gerrymandering and drew maps to restore the balance. And by 2004, the Republicans had 40.7% of the statewide share, and a minority 46% of the statewide districts. On the other hand, it happens just as much on the other hand. And here's the story. In 2010, there were 55.7% of the statewide vote was Republican, and they had 60% of the districts. But this 2010 is when people started to get pretty sophisticated about gerrymandering. So even though the vote share went down to 53.3% because of successful and clever gerrymandering, the percent of the districts went up, and the Republicans won a supermajority in the House, in the state House. Here's another thing that happens. Karen was talking about how it's hard when districts are split up, when they aren't compact, when they don't represent state and county and city lines, they end up not being harder to have you be able to be represented by someone. And you can see what happens in small cities in Georgia. Here's Statesboro. Statesboro has enough people to hold the majority if they were in one district and held that whole district. But instead, Statesboro is cracked into 3 districts where the city does not have its own voice and can't argue for its own interests. It can't be a community of interest. And it's true in McDonough and LaGrange. It's true in more than 2/3 of the small cities in Georgia are split into multiple districts in the state house of representative. And that those requirements of being able to have distinct voices for communities are not being met. The effect on Georgia elections is that they are become less competitive. What happens is, and a perfect example is what happened in 2016. The district lines were redrawn, again, these little midterm tweaks to favor one party, to the point that 81% of the legislative seats in Georgia were uncontested. That is, when the general election was run, in 81% of the seats, only one Republican or one Democrat was running. And as a result of that, because a district is drawn to favor one party so much, another candidate doesn't run because there's no hope. There's no point to it for them. Another thing that happens is people don't go to vote. If you know when you go to a general election, you're just going to have people in one party to vote for, you're not really contributing very much. You don't feel like it matters. Decisions start to be made in the primaries. What happens is that because this is a heavily Democratic or Republican district, all the decisions are made in the primary. And the problem is that the people who turn out for the primaries are the passionate ones and often the ones who are more extreme in either direction that tend to vote in the primaries, and we end up with extreme candidates with extreme views. This is redistricting gone awry. That's what gerrymandering is. Redistricting gone wrong. Gerrymandering undermines our democracy. It makes every vote not count equally. Lots of votes are wasted in a district which is all one party. They don't have a chance to really compete. The incumbents don't need to listen to all their constituents because they know that only these people who vote in the primary are going to determine whether they're elected or not. And it leads to extreme partisanship and lack of bipartisan problem solving. People don't need to work together because they're counting on this extreme small group to get them elected and keep them in office. And then, as we saw already, counties and municipalities are split, making it harder for leaders to represent the district. So the mayor of one of these small cities has to talk to 4 different representatives to get decisions made to benefit his city, which is really difficult. So why, especially this year, especially today, do we want to talk about gerrymandering? The first reason is big data. We now have very sophisticated software that can help people gerrymander down to the street level, to the house level, and make sure that they can find people of the right party to make the right districts to make them happen the way they want to happen. And it's very dangerous. We know we have the tools to do really sophisticated and really harmful gerrymandering. We also are in a setting of extreme partisanship, and gerrymandering is contributing to that. And we need to get rid of gerrymandering to help us learn once more to try to work together. And finally, this is a redistricting year. We just had a census. We're going to find out what happened in the census. And this is the year that we make the decisions that will last another 10 years until the next census and the next redistricting. And it's very important that for our future, for the next 10 years, that we get fair districts now. So just to conclude, gerrymandering may not be the sexiest topic. It may not be what we care about most, but it is what we have to care about first, because it's going to determine whether we have votes that matter. And it's not a left or a right issue. It's a right or a wrong issue. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Janet Grant, who's going to talk a little bit about what we can do about this and where we should start.
Great, thanks, Mary Lou. And that is the question that I'm seeing happening in the chat as well. What can we do? And there are a number of things that we can do, and we can make a difference. That's why we are here and why we are trying to engage as many folks as we can to be part of this advocacy fight. So first of all, I want to tell you about a couple of situations, and I think we mentioned this maybe in our last town hall as well, a couple of situations where we did make a difference. Mary Lou, if you can advance to the next slide. Back in 2017, as you heard earlier, Georgia is somewhat unique in that we allow redistricting pretty much any time that the legislature decides that they want to do it for their own purposes. In fact, there have been something like 90 some bills introduced over the last decade or so, and about 60 some of those, and I know Ken will have the exact numbers for you later if you want to check it out, where there were actually mid-cycle redistricting pieces passed. So back in 2017, when Fair Districts had just come into being and working with a number of other organizations concerned about gerrymandering in the state, we learned about House Bill 515. And that was, again, a mid-cycle deal that was being shuttled through the appropriate redistricting committees. And we showed up and attended the hearing with over 200 citizens in a packed hearing room. And as a result, the bill was dropped. When we shed light on these kinds of tactics, we were able to stop that. And again, on the next slide, in 2019, we had another bill introduced, and this one very quickly changed. We had a Republican and a Democrat who were literally going to trade citizens between their districts to make each of those districts safer. And there was, again, a public outcry, and the reps ended up deciding to withdraw their names from the bill, and it was dropped. And importantly to know, since then, since 2019, there have not been any further attempts to do mid-cycle redistricting. So we have made a difference, and this is the kind of voice that we need to bring this year in our demand for fair maps to be drawn in the redistricting process. So there are a number of ways that you can get involved here with Fair Districts. On the next slide are a few of those. Educate yourself about this. We're thrilled that you're here and that you're learning about what seems to be kind of a mundane topic, but becomes so important in literally how our democracy works. So we have a lot of educational material on our website as well. And while you're there, I put the link in the chat a minute ago, sign up on our Get Involved page. We'll put you on our mailing list. You'll get our newsletters. We're doing weekly newsletters now. You'll get action alerts when there are things that we think that folks need to know about and get loud about, as well as opportunities to get involved. We've got numbers of committees that are working on various things, including contacting legislators. We have postcarding. We're going to talk more in a minute about postcarding. We've got a letter to the editor group that is a robust group of experienced folks, but they can use more folks for us to get that word out in the media across the state. And invite us to speak. We've got a whole education team that can provide information like what we've provided tonight or on other topics around redistricting. So help get the word out. And then finally, we are a nonprofit and we've got big plans for this year, and any donations would be helpful. And again, our website is the place to do that. So I also want you to know, and there was a question about this in the chat, about what's happening at the congressional level. So the things that we just talked through are things that are really at the state level, and that's a lot of our focus for redistricting. But in Congress right now, there's a very unique opportunity to pass some legislation that will really have a very significant impact on how redistricting happens. And so please lend your voice to letting your representatives know that you are supporting these pieces of legislation. The first one is HR 1 or S1 on the Senate side. It's the For the People Act, and in the Senate, actually, our own Senator Warnock was the lead sponsor for that. And it addresses lots of issues around voting rights and elections and trying to really kind of make right our democracy. But there is a section on redistricting. This would apply to congressional districts redistricting, so it would not apply to our state house or our state senate, but it would apply to how the congressional districts are redistricted by our legislature. And it would require an independent citizens commission to actually do that redistricting. That would not happen until 2030. But in the meantime, the other pieces around standards for redistricting would apply. If this passed this year, these would apply to how the congressional districts are redistricted this year. And then the other piece of legislation, HR 4, is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And this would put back in place the pre-clearance requirement that was undone by the Shelby decision from the Supreme Court back in 2013. And so that would require states like Georgia, who have had issues with both redistricting and voting rights, to have the Department of Justice review of our districts before they would be put in place. So please lend your voice to these important pieces of legislation. Now, mark your calendars for some other things that we have coming up. Next month, our monthly town hall will be on May 24th, and we're really excited about the focus of this being on the Voting Rights Act and the focus on minority opportunity districts in Georgia. And we have a really great panel coming together here, including Senator Anderson, who is the lead for the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus. We'll have a speaker from ACLU, and we're working on some academic speakers as well. So another chance for you to really learn about all of these issues. And as we said earlier, racial gerrymandering is illegal, and obviously we want redistricting to support the opportunity for minorities to be represented by a candidate of their choice. And another thing to mark your calendar for is our upcoming postcarding event on the next slide. And our own Pam Woodley is going to be doing a series, I think, but starting on May the 2nd, she's going to be doing a series of postcard parties. And I just realized that this slide doesn't have all the information on it. But on Sunday, May 2nd from 4 to 5, she will run a Zoom postcarding party. You can also sign up with Pam to do postcarding on your own. In addition to being part of this postcard party. So we'll be writing postcards to the redistricting committee members, and you can either put in the chat now or email Pam at pamwoodley@comcast.net and give her your cell, your name, your cell, your address, how many postcard sets that you would like to write up. We've got some really neat postcards that we have printed for this. and whether you need help buying stamps. So join us with our advocacy with postcarding, and invite your friends to be a part of that. So, and then the last thing I want to make you aware of upcoming, and this doesn't have a date yet because we're waiting to see what happens in the legislature in terms of holding public hearings. But we will be out in the communities with a number of our partner organizations. There are a lot of organizations, nonprofits here in Georgia that are working on redistricting, and we're working together to make sure that communities have a voice in this process. So let us know if you are a part of a group or an organization, especially in other areas of the state. Let us know who you are so that we can be sure to reach back out as this continues to evolve, and we're able to engage folks across the state in the process. So, and then the last slide I have is just to remind you that we are on social media. Please email us with any questions or suggestions. Follow us on Twitter and on Facebook, and please follow us, but also retweet the information or share the information so that we can get this information out far and wide as we progress through the year. So with that, we are going to transition to questions and answers. And I know that I already saw a number of items in the chat before I started talking that I think we'll go back and talk a little bit about. But at this point, if you've got other questions, please put them in the chat, and our panelists will come back and help answer those. So the first question I'm going to ask is one that was asked earlier on, and that was about how does redistricting happen really at the local level. So we've talked about congressional, and we talked about the State House and the State Senate, but there are lots of other governmental entities across Georgia that also have redistricting. And I don't know, Ken, do you want to refer to or respond to that?
I'll take a shot at it. It's a bit of a hodgepodge, actually. I was doing some research during the event to understand some of the county stuff. A lot of the city level, like if you have a city council, for example, and your city council has districts that are not at large but are specific to the territory, that's typically going to be handled by your city council in some processes under the control of your city council, right? County districting, I think, is a little bit of a mixed bag. I was looking at Fulton County online, and it looks like the way this is done at the county level is that they have to propose a set of districts, and then the state legislature gets a vote on. But it's typically handled by whatever the county delegation wants. It's just voted through. So it's probably drawn up by folks at the county level, and then it has to be approved by the state legislature. So I would say largely it's under the control of the organization, whether it's city or county. In some cases, the state legislature may have to enact the change, but the design of the districts would be done locally as best as we understand it. What the state does is at the state level, we do congressional, state house, state senate, and the public service commission districts are drawn by the state legislature. I think there's 4 or 5 public service commissioners, and those are specific districts across the state, and those districts are also drawn by the state legislature itself.
And the other thing I just mentioned too, many of us were following Senate Bill 202, and one of the things in that 98-page bill actually was an item that was placed at the request of the Municipal Government Association, and that was to delay their need to do redistricting and because of the fact that the census was going to be late. And as you know, municipal elections happen in November, and so they wouldn't have had time to do the redistricting. So the language is something like that, that there's a grace period of, I think, 120 days for the redistricting to happen before they have to be used in a municipal election. Okay, I'm going to ask one other for you, Ken, and that is there was some questions in the chat about the Supreme Court ruling and exactly what the Supreme Court has said about gerrymandering, and then kind of wrap into that what can the courts do about gerrymandering and what can they not do?
Okay, so I presume we're talking here about the partisan gerrymandering decision from 2019, which was Rucho versus Common Cause. It was a court case that came up from North Carolina. It was consolidated with another course from Maryland. What the Supreme Court of the US said is that partisan gerrymandering is a political problem. It is not what they call justiciable, or it's not a thing that the courts at the federal level should get involved in, right? So the Supreme Court has basically said federal courts are no longer a place where you can appeal a partisan gerrymander. You can appeal a racial gerrymander because that's subject to the Voting Rights Act. And that act is a law that cases can be decided under that law. And there have been hundreds of cases, right? So the Supreme Court really made a big change about the partisan gerrymandering. The court case that happened in 2004 that I think Mary Lou referred to, the districts that were drawn for the 2004 election were drawn as a result of redrawn as a result of a partisan gerrymandering case in Georgia that went to the Supreme Court in 2004. But now the court is saying it's off limits for federal courts. So in theory, you could pursue that in state court, not federal court. But in Georgia, we don't have any language, we don't have any laws governing partisan gerrymandering, and we don't have any language in our Constitution. Other states had an advantage. In North Carolina, when their court case failed at the federal level, they went to the state level. Their state constitution had a very interesting clause in it that said that citizens are entitled to a free and fair election. And so under that, they objected to the partisan gerrymander in North Carolina, and they won. But Georgia has no such clause. It's unfortunate that our Constitution is rather weak on this subject. We have 2 sentences about redistricting and 64 pages about the lottery. So our priorities are a little bit odd there. So the bottom line is that, from a partisan gerrymandering point of view, Georgia, the courts are not a good place to go. But for racial gerrymandering, we do have a place to go. The other thing I'll say is that in many cases, because a very large percentage of our Democratic population also happens to be minority, if you tackle it as a minority representation issue, which is completely, you can go to court on the Voting Rights Act, you actually can fix some partisan gerrymandering problems by attacking them as minority representation issues under the Voting Rights Act. So you're gonna get a twofer on that. But so that our court landscape is not real strong in terms of Georgia, other than the Voting Rights Act and minority representation issues.
Great. We also had a question, Ken. I don't know if you want to answer this or you want Karen McGowan to come on camera and review what our breakdown is actually of Republicans and Democrats in Georgia. You mentioned earlier that we're a swing state. How does that actually show up in the data?
Karen, you want to take that?
Oh, you're muted.
Yes, sure, that would be fine.
And to introduce Karen, she is our lead for our mapping and analysis team, Karen McGowan.
Mapping and analysis, yes. So as part of mapping and analysis, we downloaded 20 years of election results and attempted to do some analysis to see if we could detect patterns that might indicate gerrymandering. So as a part of that, we had to, in order, and our analysis is very simple and pretty straightforward. And what it was is a comparison of vote share and seat share, with the idea that more votes should result in more seats and more representatives of each party, and fewer. So if vote share is declining, the opposite should happen. And that entailed trying to figure out a benchmark that you could use to determine what vote share is statewide among the parties. and you would think you could just add up all the races for, for instance, for the congressional districts, you add up all the Dem votes, all the Republican votes for the state Senate, the same thing. You could just add up all the individual races and the individual races in the state house. But the thing that makes that difficult is what Mary Lou and Karen were talking about earlier, which is uncontested races, and you actually have missing votes. So as a proxy, you can look at statewide races, what we call the marquee races, which are generally president, governor, Senate races that most people vote on. They are, as far as I know, never uncontested. They certainly haven't been in the last 20 years that we've been doing the analysis for. So most people vote on them. Even if they don't vote down ballot, they'll vote for the president, they'll vote for the governor. So you can average those races over a given year. And sometimes there's multiple races, like for instance, sometimes you'll elect president and senators, as we did this year. Sometimes, you elect one, it's one race only, like the governor in 2018. But you can average those races to get a figure that you can use as a proxy for comparison. So, just looking at my data now, it's been really interesting. I mean, as most people know, Georgia, in 2020 and with the runoff races in 2021 was the first time that Democrats in a couple of decades have well, actually, that's not true. In 2000, they actually held more than a 50% share of seats. They held like 50.7%, but they haven't in 20 years. This year, Democrats do. They hold a 50.4 statewide percentage average to Republican 49.2. In 2018, the Republicans held a 50.2% average to Democrats 48.8. And in 2016, it was 52.9 to Democrats 43.5. So right now, it's for all intents and purposes a 50-50 split.
Great, thank you, Karen. As you can see, we're crunching lots and lots of numbers here. Between Karen's team and our work with the Princeton Gerrymandering Project as well. There was also another question, I think, about, there were a number of questions about prison gerrymandering that Mary Lou brought up. Mary Lou, do you want to just say a little bit more about prison gerrymandering?
Okay.
I think there was a question about, how that really negatively impacts the home district of the prisoner, and how it inappropriately impacts the prison district.
So what happens in prison gerrymandering is that when people go to prison, they're taken out of their home districts, moved into another district, which is generally a rural district in Georgia. And then the local laws allow them to be counted in as residents of that district for the purpose of elections. Of course, they can't vote. So they get extra individuals to be counted to give them representation, but they don't have votes. In Georgia, there are, I think, five. You saw what Karen was showing you, how closely competitive we are now as a state, and how much a few percentage points can make a difference in terms of what happens in elections. What happens in prison gerrymandering is that people are taken from these urban areas. They're not counted in their home districts. They're counted in these rural areas, and their home districts lose 5%, while the rural districts gain 5%. I think there's one district in Georgia where prisoners actually account for 11% of the population of that district, which gives that district more representation for the same number of voters. It really seems to, it's certainly because when the people go back, when they leave prison, they're going to go back to their own communities and hopefully become voters there.
Great. Thanks, Mary Lou. It is a big topic. There are 10 states that have outlawed prison gerrymandering now. And if you want to find out more information about that, I did put a link to the chat for the National Prison Gerrymandering Project that has a lot of good information.
Janet, there's a story in today's New York Times if anybody's interested.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's a good reference too. Okay, one more question, and that is, we've had a number of questions about how do I find out about my district? How do I have access to a map or know whether my city's been split, etc.? Ken or Karen, do you want to take that one?
Karen, you want to take that one? I know we've got some stuff coming that isn't quite at ready.
Yes.
Please, that's up your alley.
And it's a fascinating question because, you know, camping on what I was saying about the analysis that we've done of electoral data doesn't necessarily tell you if your district has been packed or cracked. Although you can look at before and after scenarios like Mary Lou and Karen were showing, where you could see between when the decennial redistricting was done, and you could see where vote share dramatically either dropped or didn't. A party's vote share didn't increase or even dropped, and yet they gained seats, and that looks pretty fishy. You can also see during the mid-cycle redistricting efforts, and as Janet mentioned, there have been, I believe, something like 94 attempts over the 20 years to change boundaries on 94 districts, and 64 have been successful. So, in between times, if the vote got a little close, if it looked like they wanted to shore up a district for an incumbent, they could just alter the district lines. Sometimes those work, sometimes they don't. We have not done a granular level before and after analysis of each of those districts, although we've got some projects underway. And if you're interested in mapping and analysis, we need help. So put your name and your email in the chat and let us know. But one project we're undertaking right now that we've alluded to is with a group called the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. They are a group that is associated with Princeton University. Their lab director is actually a professor there, and they're using statistical analysis to see whether the changes and voting patterns in Georgia are to try to get an idea if they are a result of actual manipulation, like you saw in the pennies and dimes example, or if it's just geography, because it's never going to track exactly with these averages that was talking about. Now we're a 50-50 split. It's very likely we won't ever have a 50-50 representation because of where people live. And the fact that districts have to be contiguous. You can't, take little patches of neighborhoods from all over the state and put them together to make a district. But they can do a statistical analysis that yields results that gives us an idea of when a district is an outlier, when it is very likely that result, that what is happening in that district, whether we would expect to see it or not, given a statistical analysis. So, again, it's difficult to see. There are some easy ways to look at data like the before and after the decennial redistricting. If the vote share is dropping, but the seat share is going up. But there are some times that it's not as obvious. And again, as Mary Lou and Karen were saying, now the programs that help legislators draw districts are so sophisticated that you don't have to draw these goofy looking districts anymore. So we're going to try to supply more information about that as as the year goes on. And so we're looking at doing additional presentations. I wish I had a more definitive answer.
Yeah, and for our program next month on the Voting Rights Act and minority districts, we'll be sharing information about some of what that looks like here in Georgia. Mary Lou,
Something we try to do, I'm with the education group, whenever we do a presentation, is to get maps of your area and show you a little bit about what it looks like and how it's divided. So that might be something, a way for you to see some more. We'll try.
Yes, the split city analysis is very telling too.
As Janet was mentioning, we're going to be coming out to the communities and with other partner organizations and asking you to provide community input. And we'll do our best when we come out and meet with a community group. If you identify a community group that wants to work on this with us, we'll bring some the ability to view some of your maps and your data there. We can't just hand it out, but there'll be a way for us to show you what your local districts looks like. So as you're thinking about how to define your community and your input, you'll have at least a view of your maps when we have that conversation.
okay, we have run out of time. We are 3 minutes over. Ken's going to close us out real quickly. And again, we really appreciate everyone being here. Ken?
Yes, thank you so much. We're going to be continuing these town halls. We're looking for your suggestions. Are there particular topics you'd like to see? Our next town hall, of course, is on the minority representation of the Voting Rights Act. That's going to be very interesting. We will be coming out shortly after that with more results from our Princeton work. I think that's going to be very fascinating information in terms of some of the deep research we're doing. And as I said, we will be coming out and engaging at the community level as well. We have some time to do it, but the year is going to go by, and the redistricting activity is going to be all crunched in at the very tail end of the year. Once that census data comes out, we are anticipating the legislature trying to get the maps done as quickly as possible. That's not always a good thing, right? We'd rather they take their time, and we're going to try to influence that process by producing some benchmarks that show them what fair maps would look like, and we hope that works. But at any rate, we look forward to continuing the dialogue. Join us on social media. Feel free to ask questions there and post, and follow us on Twitter, post on our social pages. We really want your help and your engagement. Appreciate everybody's attendance this evening, and have a good evening. Bye.